Okay, so this is work that we're presenting from the Malta Digital Innovation Authority, a national technology regulator that was set up in 2018. And we're just going to give our perspective in some work that we've done in providing some sort of form of regulation on artificial intelligence. And this is work from not only the staff of the Innovation Authority, but many consultants who we've reached out to. So indeed, there's a spectrum of opinions when it comes to what is required to regulate AI, and should we even regulate AI, from complete mandatory regulatory compliance to freedom and allowing for the market to self-regulate itself. However, let's take a step back. Let's first start to consider that AI is first and foremost software. And we've been writing software for decades, from all sorts of different types of user interfaces to embedded software to robots. And we all know that software works. We've been doing this for decades, but indeed it doesn't. Indeed, even the simplest of software ends up with numerous bugs. And we can even see real live robots crashing due to bugs crashing. But if we look back towards history, some infamous bugs that we can think about are the NASA Spirit rover that became unresponsive after a few weeks that it landed on Mars. And this was due to a bug in its deletion software routine. The Theric-25 radiation therapy, which was responsible for killing at least 5 patients that are known. And this was due to a user interface bug that resulted in the nurses using the actual machine were displayed with one value, but the radiation therapy value actually administered was another value inside of the software memory. And these bugs are on relatively trivial software. And nowadays, we're using artificial intelligence, which is much more complex. And it's not just about ensuring that the software itself is correctly, but also the training and the data that these algorithms are trained on, that they're suitable and sufficient for the particular problem. So we're not only dealing with correctness of software, we're also dealing with adequate procedures for training. And which safety critical AI-based system will become infamous and added to this list? Well, ideally none. So what we considered was, let's start by focusing on raising the levels of technology assurances in certain types of systems when we're using artificial intelligence. Now, I could go through this story discussing how AI from robots will lead to robots not taking any more orders from its humans and eventually putting us into some sort of matrix, right? The whole concept of the simulation theory, AGI, so on and so forth. There are many out there, especially in the academic community, certain sides of it will say that AGI will never exist. Nonetheless, though, many policymakers, many individuals out there are still scared of this end of the world scenario that AGI will take over the world. So irrespective of whether we agree or disagree that AGI will ever exist, we took the stance that some safeguards are definitely needed for AI. And AGI is not upon us right now, so we will start by regulating and ensuring certain principles in ANI and leave AGI for future. So the first policy decision that we made was differentiate between ANI and AGI and start by focusing on ANI. The next question that came to us is, should we regulate all artificial neural intelligence? And indeed, there are certain use cases where some form of regulation, some form of assurance needs to be applied, such as if we're looking at court decisions where an individual's life could be on the lines, we need to make sure that we're regulating that in a sound manner. Similarly, if someone is going to apply for a bank loan, and we need to make sure that there's no unjust bias in that procedure. We shouldn't have an individual behind a bank making a decision, whether it's software or not, making decisions based upon perhaps the brand of clothes that someone's wearing, because they may be able to look at statistics and find that this particular type of client would end up eventually defaulting. But at the same time, there are many types of systems that likely do not require regulation, even if using AI. So if we think about music recommendation systems to some extent, the more bias that is in my particular recommendation system, probably the better. I want to hear music that I like. And if I'm put into that category, that will probably provide better recommendations for me. Now, obviously, there's difference of opinions on that. And in regard to if someone wants to hear within their particular category or preferred categories or not. So the second policy decision that we looked into was do not regulate AI across the board, because there are many applications which would be stifled if we regulate them. Only regulate where required. So we looked at non-AI software-based software as well. Let's say a bank processing algorithm ultimately makes a decision, approve the loan or do not approve the loan. And whether this is based upon statistical, rule-based systems, random, whether it's even based upon a human, at the end of the day, it is this decision that is critical. And we don't want to leave any loopholes. Whether we're using AI or we're not using AI, this decision-based system needs to follow whatever principles that we want to instill within a bank loan processing system. And again, like I said, whether it is software or whether it is humans, it is the decision and the principles that we want to look at. Now, if we create AI regulation and it captures non-artificial intelligence software-based decisions into it, we're regulating more than just AI. We are regulating software. And could we stifle software by regulating all software? So we need to be careful by not over-regulating or specifically regulating AI that will capture non-AI software inside it. So the question that arises, should we regulate all software? And whether it's software or whether it's a human behind the decision-making process, what we need to actually focus on from our perspective, from starting off with initial policies, is that we want to make sure that this decision is not discriminating, irrespective of whether it's a human or whether it's software. So we want to focus on the sector, not on the software itself. And if you look at many sectors like bank loans, discrimination, court decisions, a lot of GDPR, a lot of regulation already exists and tells us what we need to do, even in terms of bias and discrimination. So by creating regulations specifically for these types of sectors, are we now going to be replicating law? Are we going to be replicating certain laws that define you cannot discriminate? Because these laws already exist. So the third policy decision was do not mandate artificial narrow intelligence regulation, rather focus on regulating the sector and activity, not the technology. The technology then needs to abide by whatever regulation is applied to the sector. So we then went ahead and said, okay, we'll regulate the sector. Now we're often using AI-based systems and other types of systems in such sectors. And we could end up seeing bugs where individuals are cheated of giving certain loans or are subject to unjust bias due to perhaps software bugs. So what we started with is by looking at assuring that the software that is used in these types of regulated sectors and instances and safety critical systems, we need to make sure that this software is fit for purpose. So the fourth policy decision that we looked at was for regulated and safety critical sectors and activities, technology audits need to be considered, especially if they're AI, artificial neural intelligence-based systems. Now, the issue with technology audits is you'll find all types of different auditors out there, those who do a great job, high quality, and they may be quite onerous in terms of costs, and those who do perhaps not such a good job and are not so thorough, and they'll be cheaper. And as a national regulator wanting to assure that these sector-based software implementations are fit for purpose, we need to assure some level of assurance in regards to the levels and qualities. And how can we do this? Well, we need to look towards some standards. And the fifth policy decision was, in order to assure these levels of standards and audits undertaken, a national technology regulator was set up. And that is what the Malta Digital Innovation Authority became, which is the authority responsible for the levels of assurances, audits, standards, which are undertaken. So the first steps in regulating when we created this framework was to create a voluntary regulatory framework, where if you wanted to undertake certification and have your system audited, you could. But then when it comes to regulated sectors and other safety critical systems, such as, let's say, fintech applications that is regulated by the financial authority, the financial authority itself could mandate such technology audits or other laws could mandate such technology audits. So we're primarily a voluntary regulatory regime, but we can be mandated through other regulators and laws. And the Malta Digital Innovation Authority was set up to ensure these levels of standards, and the laws were enacted. Now, the framework defines an innovative technology arrangement, which is not specifically on AI, it's wider. And the reason is because we have very similar issues in blockchain, DLT, and other software. So we started with a wider definition of what we want to include, and then we created specific standards when using types of technology. And currently within the ITA, within the ITA framework, we support artificial intelligence systems, architectures, code, and related software. So it's quite a wide definition. And just an overview of the process, when we're undertaking an audit, or actually the whole regulatory framework, the MDIA, what it does is it vets and scrutinizes system auditors. These are external companies who have the expertise who can undertake such audits, because we can't do that in-house. Otherwise, we would be struggling to find the right resources. So this is one way of outsourcing our regulatory arm to existing audit companies. And the different audit companies have their own subject matter experts, and we also verify them that they have the right levels of experience and education and know-how to undertake whatever audits they claim that they can undertake. So we heavily scrutinize and vet them, and they're approved. Then when someone wants to come and audit their system, there needs to be a known identifiable party who's running the system, and there needs to be a technology administrator appointed who can intervene in the system if required. For example, if the system has gone haywire and for some reason it's causing damage, the technical administrator must have powers of intervention to intervene if required. And we vet the individuals as well. Besides this, there must be a forensic node. And a forensic node is responsible for collecting all information to do with the running of that system. Now, the Innovation Authority releases guidelines that the auditor, that the subject matter experts must abide by when they're undertaking these audits. And we've released guidelines specifically for artificial intelligence, and which define the different control objectives that they must check. The system auditor then is the actual one responsible for undertaking the audit, because they're the ones with the expertise. And they might find that the whole system is seen to be sound, and they issue an audit report. That audit report at the end of the day is passed on to the Innovation Authority along with the applicant's application and a description of what their software, what their AI is doing. And the authority then undertakes scrutiny on the report and on the application to make sure that the audit report seems sound and the process is undertaken to reach the conclusion that levels of technology assurances applied are adequate. And if this all goes well, then we issue certification and the software is deemed to be fit for purpose. So looking at the process, the applicant really comes to us with a blueprint of their software and the application. And like I said, that goes to the system auditors. Then along with the system auditor reports, if the MDIA is happy, we finally issue certification for that. Now, how does this structure help? We're giving applicant due diligence, so there's a known identifiable party behind the system who can be held liable if required. There's technology due diligence being done by the system auditor, reaching a level of assurance that the system is implementing what it says on the box. Like I said, there's the identifiable known party, and there's a forensic node which can be used for post-mortem events if required, if something went wrong, or if we want to, if we're not sure why a particular algorithm took a particular decision, this can be investigated with the authorities or even other authorities. And there's some power of intervention for when things do fail, and there's some first point of contact who can act when things do fail. And that will be the technology administrator. Now, in a court of law, according to our laws, it is the English description that will prevail over the implementation if there's any argumentation between the various parties involved. So that provides at least some sort of assurance in regards to what the system is expected to do. Now, that's what we started with. We started with quite an onerous audit framework, and this is not appropriate for all types of startups, of companies in various phases because it's quite expensive. So we then further looked into creating a technology assurance sandbox, which we just launched. And this has allowed for more flexibility in regards to the types of assurance that are required, and allows for us to scale down the framework to be proportionate to the risk involved in the particular operation. And in future, we're looking into other tools to include into our regulatory framework that might even be able for us to allow for lower levels of assurances for lower level risks. And these two tools that we have really now, we feel that they're going to help us to adapt quickly to other regulatory regimes as they're put forward, such as those from the European Union, for example. And this is just one part of the puzzle. This is just technology assurances. This is what we started with. And indeed, we need to look forward to defining liability, issues of protection and privacy, specific solutions for specific sectors, ethical considerations. This is just one piece of the puzzle, and this is where we started, and we're looking forward to see how this regulatory framework may fit into the future of regulating AI. So that's it for my talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Joshua Ellul, for your presentation. And now we have a question from the audience. We actually have two questions. Mr. Dennis is here with us. Mr. Dennis, can you confirm that the question was made by you?
Yeah, that is actually my question, yes.
Okay, would you like to make it? Please, be free.
Okay, yeah, so the question is specifically, we've seen as a consequence from GDPR that specific services are just no longer available in Europe because they would have to follow specific regulations. Did you investigate how you can ensure that having new regulations doesn't just force companies to avoid a specific market?
Yep. So because the regime is first and foremost voluntary, they don't need to leave. It becomes mandatory if the financial authority, let's say, mandates some sort of regulation, or the health sector. Now, if they need to leave due to some mandated regulation, there's not much we can do as an authority, but we are going by the principle that if our financial authority is putting certain regulation in place, then it should be there for the right purpose. If not, as an authority, we will combat against these local regulation.
Mr. Joshua, I'd like to give you one more minute for final words, since we are almost at the time for the presidential address. So please, could you please have final words?
Yep, so it was a pleasure being here, and I look forward to seeing how the tech, law, AI regulatory world does evolve. It was a pleasure.